Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bedlock Gamer, and today we're talking about the Zoophonia Muse. I think that's kind of one of the things that slipped by a lot of people when it came to Hell of the Wild, is we got a whole actual subclass in the book. Yeah, we got options for witch, and I guess the patrons actually technically are kind of the subclasses for witch as well. But Bard has really gotten very few muses since it began, only really having Warrior Muse since the Advanced Player's Guide. So, getting a whole nother muse is actually pretty big, though, is it a muse that people will be excited for? I'm kind of left at a midpoint where it's okay, but at the same time, I don't know. So let's take a look at it and you'll see what I'm talking about. So, first of all, the muse. Every muse that we see will give us a feat and a spell associated with it that we get as a free part of our repertoire. Kind of cool. And for this one, we get the Zoophonic Communication and the muse spell Summon Animal. Now, Summon Animal is an interesting one, but obviously, as you can tell by the image behind me, that you can over there. You can see that it's all about summoning the wildlife, becoming a Disney princess. I can actually imagine a lot of really fun ways of using and interpreting this particular muse. Summon Animal, though, is so rough, and it's one of the weird points of Pathfinder where you can eventually summon dragons, demons, angels, but you can't summon beasts. You can summon animals, but not beasts. And if you're unfamiliar with the difference, beasts are predominantly magical beasts, something like the Catoblepus, for instance, where a animal is just like an animal. And they're just not very many animals, and they're very not interesting, especially when you compare this to summon fae or even summon plants. So, Summon Animal is a spell that has some interesting uses, but I feel is kind of one of the worst summons in the game. Regardless, it's an extra spell, so hey, it's not a big deal. But you'll see it ties a lot more in to the class itself. But let's go ahead and take a look at Zoophonic Communication. So, Zoophonic Communication is the talk to animal feat. Only this time you can use performance instead of diplomacy, as if you had shared the same language. And this is good because obviously Bard is really good with performance and it really leans into a lot of their things. So yeah, I'm actually kind of hyped about this one. Though it is important to mention that you actually don't understand what the creatures are trying to say back to you. You don't actually get to speak you get to speak to them, but not with them. Regardless, it's pretty good. And honestly, if you're a bard and animals don't have the best saves anyway, it's one of the weird things about Pathfinder as well is there's yeah, sure, you have to make a roll against their I think perception DC, but they're gonna be super low level to you, so you just always kind of get it always works and probably almost always crits. So yeah, interesting. Also, you can use performance instead of nature to command an animal. This is actually particular good when you're riding horses. It's not a very commonly talked about part of Pathfinder, but when you ride a horse, you need to use the command an animal action, which requires you to make a nature check to do so. Now you can do it with performance, which is just it consolidates what Bard already does. I love that Bard can make so many things just performance. It makes them really interesting and really cool, and it allows them to diversify what other things they can do by allowing them to do so much with performance. So I like this particular feat. Is it the most handy of the Bard and Muse feats? Meh. Not particularly, but there's a lot of fun things that can be done with this, and honestly, an incredibly intelligent player can make the best use out of this. Also, if you ever have a bonded animal or anything like that, can come in handy for a lot of situations because you can use the command an animal action with performance instead. So overall, not a bad feat. Moving on from this point, let's go and look into the actual feats you can select as a class. And I might be mistaken, but I don't think there's any other of the muses that has this many specific feats for that muse. I think they're all pretty generalized. So that being the case, it's kind of cool. We get so many feats specifically for Zoophonia. Starting off, we have Bestial Snarling. So Bestial Snarling is a second level feat you can select, and essentially what it does is you can attempt a nature or performance check and compare it to the will DC of each enemy adjacent to you. And if you have an animal minion or an animal companion or a summoned animal, you can compare it to each enemy adjacent to them as well. If you succeed, the target is frightened 1. If you crit succeed, frightened 2. And regardless of the result, the target then becomes immune to this for 10 minutes. So it's essentially a second demoralize, but better because you can use this against every enemy adjacent to you and an animal companion or animal summon. So that being the case, summon animal actually becomes a little bit stronger due to Bestial Snarling, because now, in addition to sustaining it, plus sustaining your, whatever composition cantrip you're currently using, you can also now use Bestial Snarling and have your animal companion kind of do all kinds of things. So your animal companion gets 2 actions. You can action to snarl with this particular ability, and then whatever your composition is also sustained. So not a bad combination, though that does mean you just don't get any other spell casting. You're putting all your eggs in your your controlled animal basket. Now, if you have an animal companion, this does work a little bit better, sure, but animal companion does kind of conflict with Bard a little bit, having essentially another sustained action, though eventually when you get to mature animal companion and beyond, your animal companion can just move and strike without you needing to do anything. So honestly, this works, in my opinion, better with the animal companion feat. Now, granted, you can't select that natively in Bard, so you have to go outside of Bard in order to get an animal companion, meaning you might need to multi-class archetype to get the most out of some of the feats select here in the Zoophonia one. So yeah, I think this is interesting. I think there's some interesting ways that goes around this. I just think that it causes you to juggle a lot of balls at once, and you might drop something, and combat isn't particularly long. Most players don't get that many actions, so it just seems like you would want to do something more impactful regardless. Despite that, Bestial Snarling I do think is good, and it's good just in general because it's just an AoE demoralize around your character anyway, which can be good. And it actually stacks with demoralize because you can also do demoralize for other rounds, meaning that you get essentially 2 demoralizes, which is pretty good. All right, at level 4, we get Zoophonic Composition. Now, this is actually really, really good, though it also just still heavily leans into the summon animal spell. So what it does is once per day, you can, as a free action, if your most recent action was to cast a composition spell, which I wish this said cast and or sustain, because if you're sustaining one, it would make a lot more sense. But if you were to cast a composition spell, you can now sustain your summon animal, or use the command an animal action. So both of these are really good. I do like combinations with summoning things. I think that makes summoning a lot more viable for sure. Though you can also just use the command an animal with your animal companion, which I feel like is generally better. So that being the case, this is good. Honestly, it's only once per day, so that's something that's a little sad. I wish it was more like once per hour or something like that, because I don't know how strong this is in actual practice. Even just limiting it to once per combat, I feel like is fine. But this one's only once per day, and it actually never gets better with any of the further feats. So being what it is, I'm going to say I like this one. I just wish the frequency was a little bit higher. Ears of the Forest is a very interesting one. So it allows you to, whenever you use the seek action, if there's any willing animals in the area you can use their senses instead, allowing you to gain such senses as scent or tremor sense. Oh my god, the senses, sense as imprecise senses. I'm going to get tongue-tied on that, I know. And this is very interesting, and your GM can give you appropriate senses for the area. This can be used in a lot of situations, not just out in nature, but also like at sea, if you have like dolphin friends or fish friends or anything like that. So I do think this one's particularly interesting. Is it worth a class feat? I don't think so, but it can be very interesting. The hard part about this is imprecise senses are mostly there to perceive things easier that your eyes can't normally perceive. So, like for instance, a hidden enemy who's like hidden in some bushes, or even an invisible enemy, you if you have tremor sense or something, if they're not masking that in any way, then they have a harder time stealthing against that kind of stuff, making it so that they're easier to detect. This is something that can be useful in a lot of situations. I just, again, is this worth a class feat when Bard does have a lot of really good class feats? I don't really think so, but to each their own. If you think this one's good, maybe it's good. I just think that by level 8, there's so many different feats, like a Dirge of Doom, for instance, that I would select over this one. So yeah, it's a pretty okay feat. Next up is Songbird's Call, also here at level 8, and I guess Ears of the Forest does strike me as a level 6. I know I went back, but now I'm seeing this one at level 8, and it makes me feel like they accidentally did 8 twice, but they don't have a 10, so they're obviously not going exactly in order. I don't know. But anyway, Songbird's Call. So what's it do? This gives us access to a new composition spell called Songbird's Call. Plain and simple. So going to Songbird's Call, the spell, it's a 2-action composition spell, which is a little bit on the rough side, but not too bad. Its effect is interesting. So you create a 15-foot emanation of birds that essentially storm and flock around you. Now, doing so makes you concealed to all things outside of the zone, and they are concealed to you. So it doesn't make it good for spell casting, but it does have some interesting uses with this particular muse. First of all, so any enemies that enter into this area that are not you, and it says a creature other than you that enters this area, so that means it does affect allies and potentially even your animal companion, which can be bad. They're pecked by the birds, and they will take a d6 piercing damage with no save. Oh no, basic reflex save. There you go. It doesn't say in the spell, but it does say in the defense. So basic reflex saving throw for a d6. A d6 at level 4 is a little rough. Obviously, it's not the pure intent of the spell, but I wish it was 2d6. And what makes it worse is it heightens every even spell rank after this point. So it's going to be another d6 up to a maximum of, let's see, 4, 6, 8, 10. 4d6 as a 10th rank spell, which is kind of bad. Obviously, this is not a damage thing. It's more for defending you. You become obscured to everyone. It just makes you harder to deal with, and enemies that do want to attack you are just going to be sitting here getting pummeled by birds. Now, is this better than like Courageous Anthem? I don't really think so, but the interesting uses for this particular composition spell. This spell actually really works to help you defend yourself while your animal companion or your summoned animal does all the work for you. For instance, you do your zoophonic, or you have your animal companion or you summon, and then the next round you have your Songbird's Call come out. Now, your obscured enemies have a harder time dealing with you, but you can still easily command your animal companion or sustain your summoned animal spell from the safety of this zone. You can even use things like Bestial Snarling, which allows you to, demoralize enemies around your companion or summon. And overall, this allows you to do it from safety. Now, as a composition spell that is very defensive, can be kind of good in some close quarters situations if you have no allies around. I think Songbird's Call is situational at best, and I feel like many of the other spells are better. And there's actually a feat a little bit later that makes this one more interesting, but also can cause other problems. But overall, Songbird's Call, I'm going to say, is okay. Again, it's situational, sure. It's got some uses, sure, and I like the thematics behind it. But I feel like there's just other things you can be doing with your composition spells every round. So that being the case, that's my opinion. Next up at level 12, we have Chorus Companion. Now, Chorus Companion is actually really cool, and it does require you have a mature animal companion. So this one is only if you have an animal companion. Again, weird that we don't have, like, it would have been cool if Zoophonia Muse had given us animal companion that we can select through our normal bard feats, but here we are. Anyway, what this allows you to do is your animal becomes trained in performance, which is kind of fun, and expert if it was already trained for whatever region, which there are archetypes for doing so. And when you cast a composition spell, you can have it originate either from you or from your animal companion, if your animal companion is within 30 feet of you. So what makes this one really good is you can use something like Courageous Anthem from the position of your animal companion, who is more likely to be on the front line, and so is more likely to pass this buff on to your allies. Even though Courageous Anthem does have a really good range anyway, still, this does have some really good uses. The also other interesting use is you could technically have your Songbird's Call originate from your animal companion. Because the emanation is only 15 feet, that means you can do so safely without being pecked by the bird yourself. As it's an emanation, it's either going to be your animal companion or you who is safe from the use of the Songbird's Call. So that being the case, I do think Chorus Companion is really interesting. I think it offers a lot of very cool interactions with some of your other composition spells, and it blends in perfectly if you're a bard who wants to also have an animal companion. So that being the case, I think Chorus Companion is really good, actually. At level 14, we get Musical Summons. Now, this one is essentially a combined action with the Summon Animal spell and any one action composition spell. So it can be used with a lot of things. It just makes your first turn efficiency a lot better. And of course, your animal companion, whatever you summon, does get 2 actions after you summon it. So you essentially get all 3 of your actions worth for summoning a creature and having a composition spell go off. Really good if you're going to go the summon animal route, though I already mentioned my grievances with summon animal. But, you know, if your GM is letting you get some really cool beasts in addition to your summon animal, then I can see this one being very, very good for a build. So overall, very, very solid. And last but not least, we have Pack Performance. Such a strange spell, but then again, I don't know, maybe this is more for certain kinds of games. So what it does is it's a reaction. It's a reaction that's triggered when a creature counteracts or disrupts any spell that you're currently casting. Now, the requirement is you have an animal minion. It doesn't have to be a companion, but it does count as, or animal companions do count within 30 feet of you. Now, when you use this reaction, your animal companion strides and strikes the enemy, and if they successfully hit or if the attack succeeds anyway, it says, your action isn't counteracted or disrupted. I don't know how often that would happen. In the many games that I've run, it's just not something that comes up very often, but maybe you have a GM who's more combative, or they're trying to actually keep your characters down. So I can definitely see this, especially if they're getting tired of like Dirge of Doom, for instance, which is just an insanely powerful composition spell. Maybe they try to disrupt it in some form or fashion. So that being the case, there's probably some games that are like this, and for as late in the game as it is, I mean, it's kind of whatever at that point. If you don't have anything better to select, then sure. And it can have an interesting interaction. I do find this one potentially useful. I think this is very much dependent on the style of GMing your GM has, or the game you're in, or just how likely it is. Maybe it's just not in my toolbox to counteract player actions, but not many enemies have that capability. So, you know, again, maybe endgame spellcasters, I don't know. But Pack Performance, I do think has some uses. So I'm going to say it's overall good if it works in your games, which in mine, I wouldn't see it being used, but I do at least see its good uses. And yeah, that is the Zoophonia Muse. A single page one, so one of my shorter videos I'm very happy about. My overall opinions of Zoophonia Muse is it's okay. It if you're going to go with an animal companion, then it's kind of cool. The problem with it is Bard is a class that already innately wants to use one of its actions every round to use or sustain one of its composition spells. So that doesn't give it a lot. And then, of course, it's a full spellcaster. So your last two actions are oftentimes to cast a useful spell. But when you change that out to having summon animal or even having an animal companion, then it becomes harder. You can't use spells as easily because you're going to have to give up either sustaining your summon or using an animal companion, or you're going to have to give up using or sustaining one of your composition spells, which is kind of one of the bread and butters of the bard. Now, obviously, not every bard has to 100% be using a composition spell every round. And I definitely understand and agree with that. And there are ways this one does blend the two somewhat. So you definitely can throw it in every once in a while. Musical summons, for instance, allows you to do it, and it doesn't even have a limit, as it's anytime you would summon a creature. So that being the case, I definitely think this particular Muse has interesting gameplay elements. I think you can play a very good, unique build that makes your bard seem incredibly interesting. And that's honestly all you really need in tabletop is a build that's fun for you and thematic and makes the story interesting for your game. So that being the case, Zoophonia Muse is good. On a pure technical level, I do think it has some struggles and conflicts, but otherwise, as a whole, it's incredibly flavorful, and it definitely provides a new style of combat to the bard that honestly a lot of subclasses should use. So that being the case, that's gonna be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I guess I didn't do any of my callouts. If you liked this video, leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. I'm going to be covering the rest of the Howl of the Wild stuff that I had yet to do. And as well, I'm going to be covering so much more next month when Player Core 2 drops, as I'm going to be dedicating every ounce of time I have, every minute of time I have, just to covering all the changes coming in Player Core 2. Also, we have these big streams all the time talking about all the stuff coming out for Pathfinder, and we have Starfinder 2 coming out. There's a lot to enjoy, so do so if that is what you feel would be best for you. That's going to be it for me, though. Thank y'all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.